Clemency, Corruption, and the Crisis of Moral Leadership. A philosophical and historical analysis of President Trump's 2025 pardons. The practice of executive clemency, the power of a head of state to grant mercy to the convicted, stands at the crossroads of law, morality, and politics. It is, in essence, a paradox. An act that suspends justice in the name of justice itself. When wielded by a ruler perceived as fair and morally grounded, it can symbolize compassion, reconciliation, or correction of an unjust legal system. But when applied to the affluent and politically connected, it can corrode trust in governance, revealing the deep fractures between justice as law and justice as equity. In 2025, President Donald J. Trump reignited this paradox. He granted clemency to a series of individuals convicted of securities fraud and tax evasion crimes emblematic of deception, manipulation, and abuse of trust. Many of those pardoned were executives or influential figures whose actions misled investors and defrauded the public of millions. Their sentences, typically between 18 and 36 months, were followed by restitution requirements and supervised release. Yet Trump's decisions to commute their sentences shortly after sentencing prompted a firestorm of outrage and reflection across political, academic, and moral spheres. What does it mean, philosophically, for a leader to exercise mercy toward the corrupt while claiming devotion to Christian ethics, justice, and moral strength? How should historians interpret such acts within the long lineage of executive grace, from the monarchs of Europe to modern democratic leaders? And perhaps most crucially, can a commander-in-chief who shields corporate manipulators from consequence be described as logical, just, or fair? What do you think? Can mercy ever be just when it benefits the privileged over the powerless? The philosophical roots of clemency. The idea of clemency has deep classical foundations. In ancient Rome, clementia was considered both a virtue and a test of character for the emperor. Seneca, writing in De Clementia, circa 55 c., argued that mercy is the gentle power of a great soul, the capacity of a ruler to temper law with humanity. Yet he also warned that false mercy, when extended to the unworthy or used for political advantage, signals tyranny disguised as virtue. In Christian moral thought, this idea evolved further. Christ's injunction to forgive, judge not, that ye be not judged, introduced mercy as divine imitation. But even Augustine and Aquinas, while exalting compassion, warned that mercy without justice degenerates into indulgence. Aquinas wrote in the Summa Theologica that justice is a prerequisite for mercy. Mercy without justice is the mother of dissolution. Thus, the moral philosopher recognizes a delicate balance. Clemency, when exercised rightly, humanizes the justice system. When misused, it undermines the rule of law. The modern executive pardon inherits this tension intact. It is both a symbol of democratic benevolence and a vestige of monarchical privilege, one requiring moral discernment of the highest order. How do you define true mercy? As forgiveness, or as justice tempered by empathy? Trump's pattern of clemency. Continuity or corruption? Throughout American history, presidents have used clemency to correct excesses or errors of the judicial system. Thomas Jefferson pardoned individuals convicted under the Alien and Sedition Acts, viewing those convictions as violations of free speech. Abraham Lincoln commuted numerous death sentences of deserters and young soldiers, guided by compassion in wartime. Even Gerald Ford's pardon of Richard Nixon, while controversial, was framed as an act of national healing. Donald Trump's use of clemency, however, occupies a different moral and historical category. His pardons often favored political allies, business magnates, and public figures whose crimes were rooted in fraud, corruption, or deceit. The 2025 clemencies continued this historical trend that began during his first presidency, when he pardoned individuals such as Michael Flynn, Paul Manafort, and Roger Stone, men convicted of perjury, financial misconduct, and obstruction of justice. The 2025 cases, involving securities fraud and tax evasion, displayed a pattern. Individuals who had exploited financial systems for personal enrichment, misleading investors through falsified earnings, corporate misinformation, or deceptive tax structures. Their actions harmed not only shareholders but also ordinary citizens whose retirement funds or savings were intertwined with these manipulative ventures. That Trump chose to pardon or commute sentences for this particular category of offender reveals his moral and ideological alignment. A worldview where wealth, loyalty, and enterprise outweigh moral transgression. The philosopher might discern here not mercy but favoritism, where clemency becomes currency, traded within the elite networks of capital and influence. Should presidential mercy extend to white-collar criminals, or should it be reserved for those wronged by an unjust system? Justice and the appearance of fairness. At the heart of the controversy lies the question of fairness. In the Greek tradition, dikaiosune, justice, embodies balance and order where each receives what is due. When the powerful receive indulgence while the powerless receive penalty, that balance collapses. Legal justice demands impartiality. Moral justice demands equity. Trump's pardons disrupted both. The majority of those granted clemency shared common traits: wealth, social standing, access to legal resources, and proximity to the corridors of political or economic influence. If clemency were meant to correct injustices, one would expect mercy directed toward the marginalized, the wrongly convicted, or the victims of systemic bias. Yet few, if any, of Trump's clemencies served that class. From a philosophical standpoint, this asymmetry undermines the state's moral authority. John Rawls, in A Theory of Justice, 1971, argues that justice requires fairness from the standpoint of the original position, that is, policies should be designed as though one did not know one's own place in society. By this measure, a system granting relief predominantly to the rich fails Rawls' test miserably. It reflects not justice but what Nietzsche called ressentiment. The moral inversion that uses power to mask self-interest under the guise of virtue. The optics are equally damning. Clemency's symbolic purpose is to express that humanity transcends legality. Yet when the mercy flows in only one direction, upward, toward the influential, the act reads less as forgiveness and more as endorsement. Do you believe justice in America is blind or merely looking away? The logic of power and the suspension of ethics. To call Trump's clemencies illogical or unjust requires unpacking what we mean by logic and justice in the context of power. Political logic often diverges from ethical logic. Niccolò Machiavelli, in The Prince, taught that the ruler's primary task is not virtue but survival, the preservation of power through calculated action. Mercy, in this paradigm, is not moral but strategic. If one interprets Trump's 2025 acts through a Machiavellian lens, they reveal not confusion but coherence. The pardons reinforced alliances with the business elite, signaling loyalty to corporate players who view regulation and taxation as obstacles. By extending clemency to them, Trump reaffirmed both his ideological stance that government should favor the successful and his strategic orientation toward wealth as a source of legitimacy. Machiavelli's stance, though realistic, invites moral decay. When ethical reasoning is subordinated to political expediency, leadership becomes transactional. The ruler ceases to embody justice and instead becomes a merchant of influence. For a republic founded on checks, balances, and civic virtue, such logic represents rot at the core of self-governance. The philosopher Hannah Arendt's reflections on authority deepen this critique. In her essay What is Authority? 1961, Arendt warned that when the moral foundation of authority erodes, only coercion remains. The people obey not out of respect, but fear or self-interest. The same applies to loyalty purchased through clemency. It replaces civic trust with dependence, distorting the covenant between ruler and ruled. Can politics ever be moral if power always comes before principle? The Christian paradox. Mercy without repentance. Trump's defenders often frame his clemency decisions as acts of Christian compassion, of mercy to the repentant sinner. Yet a theological analysis challenges this narrative. In Christian moral teaching, forgiveness follows contrition. Mercy without repentance is incomplete. Examining the recipients of Trump's 2025 clemency, few expressed public remorse. Their legal appeals often emphasize technicalities or prosecutorial overreach rather than guilt. Moreover, the crimes themselves, defrauding investors, evading taxes, manipulating markets, are precisely the modern expressions of greed and false witness that Christian ethics condemns. The Sermon on the Mount exalts the meek, not the mogul. The poor in spirit, not the powerful in lobbying. When mercy is extended selectively to those who bear no repentance, the gesture ceases to be Christian and becomes a simulacrum. It mimics faith without embodying it. A ruler invoking Christian virtue while pardoning the unrepentant wealthy performs what Kierkegaard called Christendom without Christianity, institutional piety, masking moral indifference. Thus, to question whether such a leader can be trusted. To be wise and balanced, one with strong Christian, humanitarian, and peace-loving morals is not merely rhetorical. It is essential. The evidence suggests a pattern of self-interested mercy inconsistent with Christian justice, which binds forgiveness to humility, equality, and the transformation of the heart. How should faith influence a leader's moral choices as guidance or as justification? Historical parallels. The abuse of forgiveness. To understand the gravity of Trump's 2025 clemencies, one must situate them historically. Abuse of pardoning power has often accompanied the moral decline of regimes. In late medieval Europe, monarchs sold indulgences that absolved sins in exchange for gold, buying salvation for the corrupt. The Reformation itself was a revolt against such moral commerce, a demand that forgiveness return to sincerity and justice. In modern political history, similar patterns emerge. In France's Third Republic, President Albert Lebrun's questionable pardons for financial criminals in the late 1930s deepened public cynicism and hastened the collapse of the regime. In the United States, later presidents also faced backlash for questionable grants. Gerald Ford for Nixon, Bill Clinton for Mark Rich, and Trump himself in 2020 for allies ensnared in scandals. Each case illuminates how executive mercy, when tainted by favoritism, undermines democratic legitimacy. When citizens perceive that justice can be purchased through proximity to power, they lose faith in the fairness of the system. Democracy thrives not merely on procedural law, but on the belief that law is applied equally. Clemency that mocks this principle resembles an aristocratic relic, a royal prerogative incompatible with republican ethics. Can democracy survive when mercy becomes a privilege of connection, not a principle of conscience? The moral psychology of the leader. From a psychological standpoint, the clemency choices of leaders often mirror their concept of justice. Plato, in the Republic, argues that a ruler's soul reflects the state's moral architecture. The tyrannical soul, governed by appetite and pride, produces chaos. The just soul, ruled by reason and moderation, yields harmony. Trump's clemency record reflects a consistent psychological pattern, one that equates personal loyalty with virtue and dissent with treachery. Mercy becomes a reward for allegiance, not repentance. Justice becomes vengeance against critics. This inversion of moral categories, loyalty over law, image over integrity, transforms clemency into a performance of power rather than its restraint. The philosopher Isaiah Berlin might categorize this as the triumph of negative liberty, the absence of constraint over positive liberty, the pursuit of moral self-rule. To pardon without moral criteria is freedom without responsibility, the root of arbitrary governance. History teaches that societies led by such figures rarely sustain justice for long. What kind of moral character do you believe defines true leadership today? The erosion of legal and moral trust. The long-term consequence of biased clemency is institutional decay. In a functional democracy, the justice system depends on the perception of impartiality. Its legitimacy cannot coexist with favoritism. Each time a leader intervenes to absolve allies, public confidence in the rule of law diminishes. The philosopher Jürgen Habermas underscores this danger in his theory of communicative action. Legitimacy in a democratic society arises from rational discourse, decisions reached through transparent reasoning accessible to all. When power operates through opaque acts of clemency benefiting select elites, the communicative bond between government and governed ruptures. Citizens no longer feel part of a shared moral project. They become spectators to privilege. This disintegration breeds cynicism. Ordinary citizens who see corporate criminals walk free while lesser offenders remain behind bars lose faith in the ideal of justice. Economic inequality acquires moral justification, and corruption acquires patriotic disguise. The nation becomes what Rousseau called a fake republic where liberty and virtue exist only in rhetoric. When trust in justice collapses, what, if anything, can rebuild it? Clemency and the question of wisdom. Wisdom in leadership requires not only knowledge but judgment, the capacity to balance competing moral claims. Aristotle defined phronesis, or practical wisdom, as the virtue that enables just action under uncertainty. A wise leader perceives the spirit of the law, not merely its letter. Trump's 2025 clemencies betray an absence of this virtue. By focusing mercy on the privileged, he demonstrated not balance but partiality, confusing strength with immunity and leadership with reward. Wisdom commands distance from personal interest. Self-serving pardon policies are its opposite. Moreover, wisdom demands the humility to recognize limits. The moral philosopher Iris Murdoch described humility as a selfless respect for reality. To pardon the guilty for reasons of loyalty or spectacle reveals not respect for reality, but denial of it. It projects strength but conceals weakness, a leader's inability to distinguish compassion from complicity. Do you see wisdom in such mercy, or mere political calculation disguised as virtue? Toward a philosophy of responsible mercy. Is clemency then irredeemable? Not so. When grounded in justice, it remains a noble expression of political humanity. To restore its moral legitimacy, several philosophical principles should guide its use. 1. Transparency. The reasons for mercy must be articulated publicly and withstand ethical scrutiny. 2. Equality clemency should correct inequities, not amplify them. The poor and marginalized deserve the same access to grace as the powerful. 3. Repentance mercy requires moral transformation from the beneficiary, not merely legal advantage. 4. Accountability executive acts of forgiveness must remain open to institutional review and moral critique. 5. Proportion clemency should align with the gravity of the offense and the sincerity of contrition. Only when guided by these principles can clemency become what Seneca envisioned: a firmness of the soul that finds no joy in punishment. Which of these principles, equality, transparency, or repentance, do you think should guide pardon decisions most? Trust and the moral test of power. The question posed, how can someone with these associations and alliances be trusted to be logical, just, and fair, leads us to the essence of moral authority. Political power alone never guarantees trust. It must be earned through moral coherence. Logic detached from justice is cunning. Justice detached from mercy is cruelty. The art of statesmanship lies in harmonizing both. President Trump's 2025 clemencies represent, historically and philosophically, a failure of that harmony. They reveal a conception of leadership rooted not in service but in transaction, not in justice but in preference. His actions illustrate the ancient warning of Plato's philosopher: kingship turned on its head. When rulers lack virtue, their mercy enslaves rather than liberates. History will interpret these pardons not as moments of magnanimity, but as mirrors reflecting a broader crisis of moral clarity in American democracy. The philosopher, examining these acts, sees more than political controversy. He sees a civilization wrestling once again with an eternal question. Can power be moral, and can mercy be just? Do you believe moral integrity can be restored in modern leadership, or has politics moved beyond virtue? Until mercy rediscovers justice as its foundation and power remembers humility as its limit, the answer remains uncertain. Let us not watch passively as justice bends. Each citizen shares responsibility for demanding moral clarity and power. Reflect on what fairness means to you and how mercy should serve, not sabotage, justice. Speak, write, vote, and challenge institutions that protect privilege over principle. Only through vigilance and public moral courage can we realign mercy with humanity and leadership with truth. Share your thoughts. Should executive clemency be reformed, restricted, or reimagined? How can we hold leaders morally accountable for mercy itself? Please tell me what you think and how you feel about this issue. Analyze it, brainstorm it, debate it, and if you like it, please share it. Thank you for watching. I truly and highly appreciate you, and God bless you.